Shutdowns, meltdowns, and even autistic burnout can seem to come on suddenly, especially for a non-autistic observer. But as someone who lives with Chris, a late diagnosed autistic ADHDer, I've been learning that these don't just come out of nowhere. So today, I want to share 5 signs of autistic overload that I've seen with both Chris and some of the autistic students that I've worked with as an educator, to help you better understand precursors to those times when overwhelming takes over for the autistic person. Then I'll share some ideas for how to help. Stimming. So stimming refers to self-stimulatory behavior that's designed to self-soothe when overwhelmed or overstimulated. So when Chris is really starting to feel overwhelmed, a sure sign for me that I can see is when he starts stimming a lot more often. So for him, one of his common stims is to run his hands through his hair. He does a lot of this. Or he twirls his hair in his fingers, but he's doing it and looking pretty serious while he does that, making like unicorn horns and things like that, but he's doing it a lot when he's feeling a little bit more anxious and maybe more overwhelmed with things. He also tends to pace a lot more. So when we're talking or having a conversation, rather than just sitting and discussing things or just talking through whatever it is, he might be pacing a lot more, getting up and pacing while he's discussing his ideas or while he's just listening even, because he's starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed. Chris also displays other signs of increased anxiety during times when he's starting to feel more overwhelmed. So for him, he has physical signs that show up, such as coughing. He'll cough a lot more often, even though he hasn't eaten, he's not feeling sick or anything like that. He'll cough. That's one of his signs that he's starting to feel really overwhelmed. He'll also start to spend a lot more time in the bathroom because he's having more stomach issues. So as an observer, I'll be able to see these signs leading up to him feeling really, really overwhelmed. And this could come before he actually has a time where he needs to take a break, which I'll talk about in a second too. But these things are demonstrating his heightened anxiety and a lot of times his heightened overwhelm that's happening inside his head. He also might have more physical symptoms like soreness or tension, soreness in his body from the increased anxiety and tension, more headaches, things that just really bother him physically. So he might mention the physical sensations without necessarily connecting them to his own overwhelm. But I can start to notice these things too, and it starts to create a pattern that I can see leading up to the time where he might feel really overwhelmed with something. Another sign for Chris is that he starts to zone out a lot more. And zoning out is something that I've read is very common for other autistics, but Chris begins to zone out just much more frequently than usual because he's having a lot of difficulty focusing on things because there's so much overload happening inside his brain. So when we're talking or when he's just sitting there and I leave the room and I come back, I might notice he's totally spaced out, like looking off in the distance, thinking of something else because he's completely inside his own brain and sometimes thinking through the things that are overloading him, or he just feels very overwhelmed and so he retreats inside of himself, inside his brain, to be able to kind of minimize the stress that's happening. For him, zoning out a lot of times is an escape from the real world. It's a way to retreat to a spot where things are maybe calmer inside his brain and he has more control over the things in there. And it's just an escape from the things that are happening around him. Exhaustion is another sign that shows me that Chris is starting to get really overwhelmed. Leading up to something, especially if there's an event or something that I know is going to stress him out, oftentimes I can see the stress beginning days or sometimes even weeks ahead of time. So for example, when Chris knows he needs to go to the dentist, several days before, because I try to give him as much advance warning as possible so that it doesn't surprise him when it comes, he starts to already think about that. So he's already thinking about the noises he's going to experience, the sensory overload, the stress of getting to the appointment, the fact that he needs to wait sometimes hours to go to the appointment, and it kind of throws off his whole routine for the day. He starts to think about those things many days before I would. So this starts to impact his sleep. He might need more sleep ahead of time. After the appointment, he might be exhausted from the actual event happening and from all the lead up to it and just feeling really overwhelmed and overstimulated beforehand. So exhaustion is a very clear sign that he's feeling overwhelmed too. A lot of times preceding the event, but definitely afterwards. And so if I add on more things to do during this time, it's going to overwhelm him even more. So being aware of some of those signs and how it connects to what's actually happening in his brain is really, really helpful too. And another sign that Chris is getting overloaded and overwhelmed is self-isolation. So Chris tends to try to avoid triggers when he knows he's feeling this way. And in the past, before his autism diagnosis, I didn't really understand this. I thought that he was just isolating because he, wanted some of his own alone time. So I might interrupt that fairly freely because I didn't really understand what was going on. And then eventually it could lead to him actually having a meltdown or a shutdown because I didn't give him the time and the space that he needed. So self-isolation can be something that many autistic people are aware they need to do at certain times. This is to avoid triggers, so it could look like sometimes hiding in bed. For Chris, he likes to stay under his blankets. He has a weighted blanket that he enjoys using sometimes, but it's also a safe spot where he has quiet. The lights are dimmer, so they don't really bother him. He has his blankets and his pillows that are really comfortable, and he just wants alone time in a quiet spot. And so he knows that he needs this sometimes. And so when he starts to do this a lot more frequently than usual, I can sometimes understand without him saying anything that he's starting to feel overwhelmed, and I can start to try to figure out how I can help him. So self-isolation can just be something that someone who is autistic does frequently, but if it suddenly becomes more often than usual, this could be a sign of getting overwhelmed. So if you're autistic, there are lots of ways that you can make adjustments when you're starting to feel overwhelmed. But also if you're a friend or loved one of someone autistic, here are some things that you can do to help. So first, think about what might have changed or what could be changing that could be stressful for the autistic person. So is there an event coming up, or is there something happening that's going to change the routine or be stressful in other ways for the autistic person? This could be something that's leading to overwhelm, even if that person doesn't really realize that that's what's going on. It could be something looming way off in the distance, but it's already starting to impact them, even if it's very below the surface. So they might not connect the fact that they're really struggling with this upcoming event, but if you notice that there's starting to be some of these signs of stress and overwhelm, it could be that something is about to change or has recently changed that's making them have to adjust their ways of doing things and their routines. Allow for time to reset. So give the person time and space to be able to have quiet time or alone time to be able to process what's going on and also to just decompress a bit. So when overwhelm is approaching, it can be natural to want to spend more time by yourself. But for someone like Chris, he might need this time to just play a computer game and really focus his attention on something else. Or he likes to watch nature shows on TV or Australian footy on TV. All of these things can be ways for him to really lower his stress levels before we try to figure out what's going on and how to approach the overwhelm in other ways. Once the person is able to identify what is stressing them out or what they're feeling overwhelmed with, talk together or think ahead to make a plan. So if you're on your own trying to do this, a lot of times what you might be struggling with is executive functioning challenges. So things like time management, figuring out how to prioritize certain parts of your tasks and then actually getting started, being able to figure out what you need to do in order to accomplish things by a certain timeline, or maybe even just figuring out, okay, I feel really overwhelmed by this event coming up. What can I do to minimize my stress levels about this? Because maybe it's something you have to do, but you aren't looking forward to it. How can you make this be less stressful for you and planned properly so that you know that you're ready for whatever is going to come up with it? It could also be something like preparing for a challenging conversation. So this could be something where you practice and rehearse with somebody ahead of time, how that conversation might go, different scenarios, maybe role play it a little bit so that when the time comes to have that conversation, it isn't so stressful for you and you don't feel like you're put on the spot. Another element of executive functioning might be figuring out how to do something that has multiple steps and do it in an efficient way. So something that could help is actually breaking down those steps together, or maybe even dividing up the task and divide and conquer kind of approach if you have somebody who can help you out with that. Or if you're somebody who is helping an autistic friend or family member, realize that certain things that you might not have realized are quite complicated could look very overwhelming to the other person. So breaking it down so that it's more manageable. So for example, if the task is to open a bank account, opening a bank account involves not just going into the bank. It involves bringing paperwork along, maybe identification, a certain amount of money to bring to the bank. A lot of planning goes into it before you're actually even in the bank, which involves conversations and other things that might be challenging. So thinking ahead to all the things that are involved with that activity or that event can really help to be able to break down what are the things that could be overwhelming to the other person and tackling it in a way that is manageable for them. So to help you get started with this, we're going to drop a free template in the description below where you'll be able to first make a list of the things that are causing you overwhelm and stressing you out, and then take some of the more complicated ones and break them up into different steps so that you'll be able to get organized and get started on this. And one of the most important things to always keep in mind is to be patient, whether you're the friend or loved one of someone autistic or if you are autistic. Be patient with that person or with yourself, because remember that the amount of time someone needs to be able to calm down from that overwhelm could be different from what you think, what works for you, or what you've grown up believing is the appropriate amount of time for this. So be patient with yourself and with somebody else who's struggling with the overwhelm, and understand that you'll be able to get through it in time. Part of being patient at times might also be letting the person know if there's time constraints involved. So some things that could be overwhelming might be time sensitive. So there could be times when you say, okay, I can see that this is stressing you out. We can talk about it a little bit later, but I do need to know it by the end of the day, like tomorrow. That way the person is able to get themselves prepared for that decision, but also understand that there is some sense of urgency. So an example of where this happened with Chris and I before is when we were preparing for an upcoming trip. I had decisions that I needed to involve Chris about places we were going to stop, how long we were going to stay in certain places for, the type of place he wanted to visit and to be able to stay at. This would all help our trip go a lot more smoothly, but it was also at a time where we had a lot of deadlines for our work. And so he was feeling really overwhelmed with a lot of that. He also had some doctor's appointments mixed into all of that were throwing off his routines in general. So when I was bringing up questions about our trip, he was getting a little bit frustrated and overwhelmed sometimes. So I just started to break down the things based on what I needed to know at what times. So I just let him know, I'll need to decide this and I really would like your input in it by the end of this week. So we have a few more days to do that, but I want to talk with you about it and be able to make a decision so we don't have to come back to it anymore together. So that's a really great way that you can be able to be patient and flexible with the other person and also reduce the autistic overwhelm. So what are some of the things that cause you overwhelm and how do you deal with it? Drop some of your ideas in the comments below, and thanks for watching. You're looking very special. Whew, I feel really shy.